All right. Happy Thursday yet again. Good people, good people. It is a good day because one, we are going into the new year. We have been consistent meeting up every week to get into Genesis. We are learning and growing week by week with the Word of God. For those who are new to Bible study, what we are doing is a slow walk through Genesis this year, and every week we are touching on a new chapter. Today's chapter is chapter 11, so we're getting into Tower of Babel. We're getting into more into Shem's lineage, and it's going to be great. If you can hop over to YouTube, that would be wonderful because I am doing a PowerPoint presentation on my screen, so I'll be sharing that. So like that's I think the visual, especially when we're talking about lineage, is important to hear and see as well. But per usual, we are going to jump into it by reading through the chapter. I believe in reading all the way through the chapter, continuing to make sure you are like reading the word, you're getting it in, you're seeing it, and then coming back to dissect it because you got to understand things in full context. So, what we have here is Genesis 11. I'm about to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll be good to go. Let's see. All right. Click the right button, Jessica. Okay, so Genesis 11 starting at the top, and I'm reading in NLT. You read whatever version you feel you led to. So, Tower of Babel. At one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. As the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. They began saying to each other, "Let's make bricks and harden them with fire." In this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world." But the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower the people were building. "Look," he said, "the people are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing will they set out to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other." In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world and they stopped building the city. That is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages. In this way, he scattered them all over the world. The line of descent from Shem to Abraham. This is the account of Shem's family. 2 years after the great flood, when Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arphaxad. After the birth of Arphaxad, Shem lived another 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arphaxad was 35 years old, he became the father of Shelah. After the birth of Shelah, Arphaxad lived another 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah was 30 years old, he became the father of Eber. After the birth of Eber, Shelah lived another 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber was 34 years old, he became the father of Peleg. After the birth of Peleg, Eber lived another 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg was 30 years old, he became the father of Ru. After the birth of Ru, Peleg lived another 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Ru was 32 years old, he became the father of Serug. After the birth of Serug, Ru lived another 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug was 30 years old, he became the father of Nahor. After the birth of Nahor, Serug lived another 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor was 29 years old, he became the father of Terah. After the birth of Terah, Nahor lived another 119 years and had other sons and daughters. After Terah was 70 years old, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. The family of Terah. This is the account of Terah's family. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran, and Haran was the father of Lot. But Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, the land of his birth, while his father Terah was still living. Meanwhile, Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. Milcah and her sister Iscah were daughters of Nahor's brother Haran. But Sarai was unable to become pregnant and had no children. One day, Terah took his son Abram, his daughter in law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and his grandson Lot, his son Haran's child, and moved away from Ur of the Chaldeans. He was headed for the land of Canaan, but they stopped at Haran and settled there. Terah lived for 205 years and died while still in Haran. Okay. Now, if the timeline of the years sounded like a lot, that's because we gotta visually lay it out. And I had a little time today. So what I did for y'all was put a PowerPoint together so that you can visually see the whole timeline for yourself. You can play with that. You can make sure that you can visually understand it. And so you are welcome. And it helped me, to lay it out on PowerPoint. I cannot guarantee that I would do that every week. However, for this week, and of course from last week, I did a PowerPoint because it visually, when you're talking about geography, it's helpful to see a map. And when you're talking about lineage, it's helpful to see like how all those things play together. So what we're going to do, I'm going to unshare and then I'm going to reshare to show you my screen. And of course, we're going back to the top of Genesis 11. And this is where we're going to start. But I literally put it verse by verse on the screen. So if you are on my TikTok, hop over to YouTube, go up here to the link in my bio, double click it, and you should be able to get there to my YouTube channel. And of course, as usual, if you enjoy this, you can share it with other people. I have no problem with, other people seeing it. It's a public channel and people need to know. So, Table of Nations Part 2. Here we go. At one time, this is verse 1, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. Literally what it says, at one time. Now remember, this is describing the time after the flood. So we are in the antediluvian period. I mean, not antediluvian is before the flood. We're in post-diluvian period, so after the flood. And what's happening is they are all settling in the same region. Because, okay, so let's look at this map. Remember, we talked about Turkey last week. That's where Mount Ararat is. That's where the ark landed. And so from there, this is how they dispersed from Mount Ararat. All right, so all the people from that ark experience all spoke the same language. They all continue to speak the same language and use the same words, meaning they had the same meanings, like regardless of what, I guess, place you can say you were in, you use the same things to describe things. So you know how we like let's say in US, we might have soda versus pop as an example. Well, you would know what those meant regardless of where you were because you spoke the same language. You are part of the same like ethnicity kind of thing. As the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. This is giving very much so descriptions as far as where they went. Okay, so we have Mount Ararat. They went east. They went like this. Obviously, they can't go too far east because that's the sea. So they kind of go east like this. It's going east. It's given, this is present day Iraq. This is present day Iran. This is the area that they settled in. This is biblical foundation, 101. We want to understand world history. We want to understand what's going on. This is it right here. If you're going to understand world history, you have to understand, especially Genesis 10 and 11. Genesis, all in of itself, is a great, great history book, but you got to take it piece by piece, which is why we go week by week. This is the area that they are settling in, okay? So, as the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia. Now, I put two maps on here because this is like a zoomed in version of what's going on right here. Of course, in this map right here, you can't see the rivers and all the things that are happening, but it's all coming from Turkey. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers are the two key ones here. They both start in Turkey and they come through Iraq and Iran. This is the plain of the land of Babylonia, and they settled there. What does the plain look like? The plain is the rich land that's between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These rivers go from Turkey all the way to the Persian Gulf. See how they meet up down here and they go into the Persian Gulf. This is just a physical features map, if you will, but it's just the rivers. And this is the same one we used last week, but I wanted to show you all where they were. So if you look on this map, it would be, this is the Persian Gulf right here. So the Tigris and Euphrates rivers would have literally ran through. Iraq and Iran, boom, to here. That's how that is the plain of Babylonia. Now I have another map that's going to show you where Babylonia was, and it'll have different names of cities on there so you can kind of see. But if you were to overlay these maps, you would see that it's all in the same place. So as they migrated, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia. A plain is important because it means it's fertile soil. Why is soil important? You can grow all kind of things in fertile soil. You need good soil. You're always going to find that in history, there are going to be people who settle around water. It's going to need to be solid land where they can grow things, or that things naturally grow in, because that's going to attract animals that are going to come to that land. And you're also going to be able to get good, clean water. And water, we know, is essential for living day to day. So that's how you can sort of guesstimate exactly where they were, without, even if you weren't even familiar, you could kind of figure it out, because the Bible gives us all these different clues and cities names and stuff. Okay, so this is the same thing. This is the same scripture over here. So now I just did the same map from last one. So Tigris and Euphrates River. Now look and see how that overlays with Mesopotamia. You see how you have Mesopotamia, which is the plain like area. You got Babylonia down here. Babylonia is more south, closer to the Persian Gulf. At one point, it's all the Babylonian Empire, but at this time, it's not all Babylonian Empire, because we haven't quite gotten to the empire era quite yet. But it's very, very close, because Mesopotamia is the first empire. Okay, so this is just showing you. See how Mesopotamia is noting that in between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. You should notice Assyria. That should be a very common nation. Persia should be a common nation. Remember Iran. Okay, that's Persia. Babylonia is not a name that people use current day, but it's all between the Iraq-Iran area. Okay, so now that we have a more of a visual of at one time what is describing, now we can kind of narrow down what was going on. Okay, before we move forward in this chapter, I want to do a flashback to last week. So we're going to pivot. In Genesis 10, 8 through 12, it gave us some information about what was going on in this land during a particular time. It gave us the lineage of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and it gave us the lineage of each of Noah's sons' descendants, right? So they are the ancestors eventually of nations. Cush, it says in Genesis 10, verses 8 through 12, was also the ancestor of Nimrod. This is where this kind of comes into place. So I just want to give you a visual onto what we talked about last week. Was also the ancestor of Nimrod, who was the first heroic warrior on earth. Since he was the greatest hunter in the world, his name became proverbial. People would say, this man is like Nimrod, the greatest hunter in the world. He built his kingdom in the land of Babylonia with the cities of Babylon. Okay. He built his empire, his kingdom where? In the land of Babylonia. It's not an empire yet. So we're going to, He built his kingdom, so his area in the land of Babylonia, in the city of Babylon. It literally is telling us, and Babylon sits right here on the Euphrates River. So then with the cities of Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. From there, he expands his territory to Assyria north, right? You can't see the other cities on this particular map, but there is a map that I'll show you later. And I know that Calneh is on there. I'm not sure about Akkad and Erech. From there, he expanded his territory to Assyria. So it's telling you almost like from the coast to the northern part of the river, like that is vital territory and land. He's a masterful hunter, remember? So if he's a masterful hunter and he's able to conquer because he's able to take the land like he wants, then of course people are going to defer to somebody who is skilled. It's like if you need a leader, right? Somebody is naturally going to, some people say like, oh, we can all lead, oh, we can all share the leadership. I don't really believe ever in that model of like governance, because somebody is naturally going to have a gift for leadership. They're going to naturally be able to help people more than other people and contribute in a different way. And so that's Nimrod for you. If he's able to hunt well, then that means he can feed people. The more people he can feed, the more people he can train, the more people he can do things with, they're going to all like allow him to lead them. So that's how somebody like him would gain land from Babylon all the way up to Assyria. And he built the cities of Nineveh. This is in Assyria. Nineveh's right here. Rehoboth, Ir, Kala, and Rezin, the great city located between Nineveh and Kala. So all up here, he built these cities. Now remember, Nineveh comes up later in the Bible in Jonah. All of this is happening literally. Hopefully, this gives you a great visual. All of the things that are all happening usually in this whole region right here. So now let's move on back. Now we're going back to Genesis chapter 11. Now we're moving back into that. This is verse 3. It says they began saying to each other. So they is in the people who were living before, who were living during that time, they had all migrated east. They all spoke the same language. So when they're speaking the same language, now they're unified in a sense because they can all communicate. So they began saying to each other, let's make bricks and harden them with fire. And it says, telling us some background information in this particular region. What region is that? Let's go back to our map. That's the region of Babylonia. In this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. Bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. So if you were to look at the architecture of different types of cities, you will see that one of the main things that's a difference in architecture is what are things made out of. They have to use the things that are naturally available. And so this is a great clue, especially when it comes to like archaeologists to be able to do their work, and geologists, they're going to look for certain materials. So in this particular region, instead of stone, it would have been bricks. It's a minor clue, but that's good information for people who know what to do with that information. So then it tells us that they said, come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world. Okay, it sounds kind of innocent, like maybe this will work. So first they have this idea to make bricks and harden them with fire. Then once they have bricks, they're like, well, let's build a great city for ourselves. This is where the problem comes in. With a tower that reaches into the sky. So they're trying to build a skyscraper essentially. That reaches into the sky. This will make us famous. Us famous. That's always a problem when somebody's trying to be famous, and keep us from being scattered all over the world, because they're looking to keep it unified. So they're looking to gain power. And this sounds like a very innocent thing, but we can look at what God's reaction is and tell that this is a problem with this. But the Lord, in verse 5, came down to look at the city and the tower the people were building. Look, he said, the people are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other. Okay, so let's take it a little slower. The Lord looks and observes, they're building a city, and this is a tower. We're going to have a problem. Why are we going to have a problem? Because the people are trying to access something that they did not have the authority to be able to access. It says the people are united and they all speak the same language. This gives them basically an advantage that they all speak the same language, because what happens is they're all speaking the same language, they're going to get themselves in trouble. They're trying to access something that they don't have the power and authority to access. Once they access that, it's going to get them in trouble. It's just like the boundaries that he put for them in the garden. And like God has to give us boundaries, even when, remember we talked about this, when he changed their years and he said the maximum they would live is 120 years. It's for reasons like this, to benefit us, because if we're left up to our own devices, we're going to destroy our own selves. You got to be careful of the unity that they're trying to bring upon us now. It's not a unity in a let's worship the one true God in unity. That's not the unity they're trying to get. They're trying to become gods themselves. They're trying to access the power that they want to access. It's not just about building a skyscraper. Oh, let's just build a tall building. That's not what they were. This is not a building to occupy like living spaces or something because the city is getting crowded. That's not how this is working. This is actually a tower because they are trying to get into the sky. They are trying to access power that, and this sounds very foreign to us because we're not accustomed to people like being able to talk about stuff like this. But this goes into what will be considered occult practices in the Bible, is what they're being tempted to do. And God is like, let me go ahead and let's go ahead and mix this up, give them different languages so that they cannot unify and essentially destroy their own selves. So then they wouldn't be able to understand each other. So where do different languages come from? God, yes, the original language was one, but then he created all these other languages. So all the other languages have come from him as well. It's not like it's just one language. So it says, in that way, verse 8, the Lord scattered them all over the world, and they stopped building the city. That is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages. In this way, he scattered them all over the world. In this way, he scattered them all over the world. So people did not disperse from this one area that they were in. Remember, they're in the Babylonian region, south of Mesopotamia. They were not moving out of that area until they couldn't, they had, it's almost like you had to find people who spoke your same language, or each sort of like descendant is able to have a group, their own like group that speak the same language. I'm going to break this down a little bit more when we get to the lineages so that you all can see visually, because last week they gave us some clues about when this was taking place. So we still got to go to a flashback to last week. In Genesis 10:25, we were going through the lineages of, it went through the lineage of Japheth, it went through the lineage of Ham, and now we're in the lineage of Shem. And in that time, in that verse 25, it tells us something specific about when this took place as far as Tower of Babel, and this is important. It says, Eber had two sons. The first was named Peleg, which means division. Here it is. For during his lifetime, the people of the world were divided into different language groups. His brother's name was Joktan. Now, this is a drop of information in the whole chapter, but this tells you something about the timeline, because you can follow who is who. You can see who had who had who, and who had, so where does Peleg fall? Peleg falls in the fourth generation that was born after the flood was over. So we are right now about 2,000 years from the point of creation to the flood into Babel. So like 2,000 years has passed from the Genesis 1 to Genesis 11. Okay, and you can visit the timeline that'll be in your Bible study link if you want to like look at that visually. But it's about 2,000 years has gone by. It's important for us to understand that it was during his lifetime, whose lifetime? Peleg's lifetime, that the world was divided into different language groups. This is a very important mark. So I put it on a slide so you can see this is all the lineages so far that we know in the Bible. Now, this is starting with Noah. Now, we know Noah is the 10th generation from Adam. Adam is 1, Noah is 10. So we've got Japheth, Ham, and Shem. They are generation 11. They all have children, and those children are generation 12. They all have children, and those children are generation 13. Then some of them, it gives us information about their children. This is generation 14. And here's Peleg and Joktan down here. They are at generation 15, but that's 4 generations born after the flood. After Noah. After the flood, sorry. So let's try to put this together. Remember, it told us about specific descendants in Genesis. This all comes from Genesis 10 and some of it from Genesis 11. It gave us specific descendants. We have Japheth. It gave us the first set. Japheth was the people who end up becoming the seafaring people, like Mediterranean, think Greece, in that area, like north. That's where they ended up going. In this division time, this is when all these groups are dispersing. Japheth's people ended up being up there. Okay. Ham's people, remember we have Canaan and Cush primarily, ended up being western, well, what would be like present day Israel, but it's like Israel and Syria into Egypt, into Ethiopia, like that part of Africa, very northern Africa, that is Ham's people. And Shem's people, the lineage that we're following ended up being in Mesopotamia. We're gonna get to where they were located, because I think it's very interesting that in chapter 10 it gave us all the lands of Japheth's people and Ham's people, especially Ham's people. It told us specifically where they were. It did not give us any land as far as Shem. Like his lineage was not necessarily giving land or occupying land heavily compared to Ham. Ham's people were everywhere. The Canaanites were everywhere. Cushites everywhere. But Shem's people, not so much. Japheth's people, all the northern tribes. All the northern tribes, as far as like Europe is concerned, that's Japheth's people. I pointed out Gomer because he had Ashkenaz last week. Ashkenaz, look into Ashkenazi Jews if you are like trying to kind of piece together like how do we get present day Israel with what and who are they? Ashkenazi Jews. That's all you need to know. That would give you a great indication that of where they came from. So Cush. So I'm just trying to give you a breakdown of like this is the generations. And so right here we have Peleg. Peleg is important. Let's go back to what it said about Peleg. During his lifetime, the people of the world were divided into different language groups. So it took Noah and his 3 sons got off the boat and they started having children. So Shem had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children. At least we know of as far as boys. Ham had at least 4. Japheth had at least 7. So then all of those children had children. Okay, so we know that our fact site, it tells us who our fact site had, Shelah. It tells us Aram had 4 children at least. Then it tells us that Canaan had at least a son. And we know that all the ancestors, the descendants that came from his line. And it tells us that Mizraim had at least 1 son. And we know the ancestors that came from his line. And it also tells us Cush had sons. And we know that all the lineages that came from that line. Then we had Japheth. So Japheth, of course, his 7 sons. Well, we know of Gomer's sons, they had 3, and we know Javon's sons are 4. So we have that generation. Then we have another generation that the Bible gives us specific names for. We know that Ramah had 2 sons. So that becomes 2 different nations, if you will. And then we have the generation after Shelah is Eber, and then Eber has 2 sons as well. So this is 4 generations down. So we can say that during this time, 4 generations down, this is when this was happening as far as the division, because it tells us that during his lifetime, the people of the world were divided into different language groups. So then essentially what's happening is you're all moving from the area that you were in and you're all dispersing. Now, the Bible does not give us indication of where all these people dispersed to. It gives us indication of where some of these people dispersed to. So what we have is we know that some of them went to Europe, what we call Europe. We know that some of them went to what we call Africa. We know that some of them stayed in the Middle East. We know obviously some people went to China, India, and all the regions of the world eventually became populated. So where you're going to find all of your truly what we would consider ancient history is going to be in the Middle East. That's why you see so much conflict there. That's why you see so many archaeological digs, because the oldest group of people that you can find evidence for is going to be the descendants after the flood. You're going to have 4 to 5 generations that all lived in that same Mesopotamian region. And how do we know that? Because the Bible clearly tells us that's where they lived. It tells us they were all under the same language. It tells us that there was a kingdom there. Like it's very clear. And so where they're going to find the most evidence for life is going to be in Mesopotamia. I know they told us that we come from Africa, which, people love to like try to brag on, but no, really everybody descends from somewhere in that region of like the Mesopotamia region. So from Turkey down through Iraq, Iran, all the peoples of the world dispersed from there. So now we have, in that way, it says the Lord scattered them all over the world and they stopped building the city. So This is like a cartoon image of the tower of what it would have been like. This is not necessarily for them to live. This is just, like I said, a tower for them to access. I have a video that I want to show y'all that does that whole explanation so much justice. I want you to listen to it. It says, that is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages. In this way, he scattered them all over the world. Now, this content creator and his son, like the son comes and he like asks the dad a question like, Dad, how come we don't celebrate Christmas? Or Dad, how come we don't celebrate the New Year? And the dad is like, well, do you really even know what that is? So he starts teaching him, in a very just like conversational way. And so I really love the way that he explains Babel. So let's listen into this. This is on TikTok. Okay, so hold on. Let me make sure my sound good. And then I'll start it over. Yep. All right. And just like that, that is the same thing that they were doing. And sorry for TikTok because you probably couldn't see and hear it, but it's on the guy's name is One West Yachty. Yachty is spelled Yati. This is a video from January 26th of this year. And he's the topic you'll see on is what is the Tower of Babel. So I think it's a very good explanation, and I've actually seen other videos very similar to it, where he's comparing Babel then to like essentially Babel now what we're doing and America. But the focus that I want you to gather is that what he's trying to say is that they are trying to be like God by building a tower that goes into the sky because they know that God is above. So now they're trying to get into his domain and essentially um, bring war with God, be able to access the spiritual realm. And if you pay attention to history, what you will pay attention to is the fact that that's what they keep trying to do. They keep trying to access another, like a spiritual realm. They're trying to be God. They're trying to gain authority. They're trying to gain access. They're trying to be in control. And that is what the Tower of Babel was. So he divided us, sent us in scattering across the world because that was the benefit for us so that we would not destroy ourselves. Because as soon as we try to go to war with God, then he's going to have to destroy us. And he already gave Noah the covenant and said, I don't want to do this again via water. Um, but it doesn't mean that he wouldn't do it again. He said the covenant was I won't do this. I won't cause a flood again, a global flood. He never said he wasn't going to destroy the earth again. So in order to prevent him from having to take action against his creation, he said, you know what, we're just going to scatter them. We're going to give them different languages. That's going to be a benefit to them to be more diverse, to be spread out apart because then they cannot unify. Because as soon as you try to unify, you start creating all these things and you think you're bigger than you are. That's what happens with us. We start to unify and then we get bigger in our head than we really are. Instead of acknowledging God as for who he is, we try to do stuff and be in control. Okay, so if you read that story a little bit more slowly, you will see that they were trying to be in control of their own destiny, and they were not willing to just follow the layout that God had given them to be fruitful and multiply, occupy the land. You have authority, but they wanted more than just the land that they were in. They wanted to go above it. They wanted to get to a spiritual realm, and so every time you see in like old empires, like let's say Aztec and Incans, any type of like ancient building, usually like what they call it, ziggurat, it'll kind of be like that shape. It's the same regardless of where you go because every time they got to a certain like place and they built it and the people were multiplying, they had the same idea because it came from Babel. They were all there doing it together in Babel. So even when they scattered to other places, essentially they try to do the same thing. They're trying to access the spiritual world without God. They're trying to like go around him in order to gain more power and control. And that's not what we're supposed to be doing. So every time they try to do it, they get destroyed. So why does humans keep doing it? That's the main question. Why not? Why do you keep doing this? So now we're going to jump back in it and we're going to keep going. So now we're in verse 10 of chapter 11. I'm keeping the lineage on the side. This is particular to Shem, but I'm keeping the lineage on the side just to give you a visual to go along with it. So now we're going from Tower of Babel, which we know happened during Peleg's time. That's the 15th generation, 4 generations from the flood. And it says this is the account of Shem's family. So now we get the lineage, now we get the years. This is very similar to Genesis 5 when we get the same thing from Adam to Noah. And now we're getting the same thing from Noah to who do we stop with today? Abram. Now we're getting the same thing from Noah to Abram. All right, so this is the account of Shem's family. 2 years after the great flood, when Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arphaxad. After the birth, now this is Shem. After the birth of Arphaxad, Shem lived another 500 years and he had other sons and daughters. So this is telling us that in total, if you were to look for Shem And you want to figure out how long did Shem live, you have to look and see, okay, he was 100 years old when he had Arphaxad. After he had Arphaxad, he lived another 500 years. So you have to add 100 and 500, you would get 600. So Shem lived for 600 years. Now, what you will notice is that, remember back in Noah's time, before the flood, God had already said that, we're living too long. I'm gonna maximize their lifespan for to 120 years. Now he could have started to do that after the flood, but it was like a gradual decrease over time with the amount of time that people were able to live until we have reached this 120 mark. It just took some decades, some not decades, some generations to get to that 120 mark, but it's coming. So Shem was 100 years old. Now let's look at the next generation. When Arphaxad was 35 years old, he became the father of Shelah. After the birth of Shelah, Arphaxad lived another 403 years old and had other sons and daughters. So Arphaxad was 35 when he had a child. Shem was 100. That's a drastic difference. So you see how the number is dropping down already between the two generations. And it's going to pretty much be about this consistency. And anytime it's not this consistency, you know that there's something else going on. But it's going to be pretty much this consistency. So then it says, when Shelah was 30 years old, he became the father of Eber. After the birth of Eber, Shelah lived another 403 years and had other sons and daughters. So how old was Shelah when he died? This is what I would, if I had a child and we were reading this, I would say, okay, so how old was Shelah when he died? And they're going to have to add 403 plus 30 years old, and they would get 433 years old. This is good math. Okay. Then we keep going. So remember, we just left off at sorry, I almost skipped this. We just left off at Eber, and now we're going to, this is Eber here. Now we're going from Eber. When Eber was 34 years old, he became the father of Peleg. After the birth of Peleg, Eber lived another 430 years and had other sons and daughters. So everybody in that little stint is living about the same, almost exact same amount of years, about 433, 434 years. 430, between 430 and 400, and like this one, 60 years. So now I put Peleg here. I put Joktan over here. And I wanted to point this out. It doesn't tell us this here, but it told us this in the last chapter, in chapter 10, that Abraham had two sons. And one was Peleg, and this was when division happened, and one was Joktan. Now I put this here because Joktan has other descendants that I put in the slide before. You have to go back to look at his descendants, but I think he has like 3 or 4 sons. This is in chapter 10. Where does Joktan's sons live? And it's on the coast of Arabia. So Arabian Peninsula on the western side. I think Mesha was one of the other cities. That whole north to south coast is where it tells us that Joktan's family lives. It never tells us, like, this is their domain essentially. It never tells us that Peleg was like that his descendants were over a certain area. So I just wanted to point that out, because eventually, what does God do later on in Genesis? He gives them land. So I think that that's critical. All the other ones had land. Peleg is going to inherit land that's not even his. Not Peleg himself, but his descendants is going to, Abram is going to inherit land that's not even his. To begin with. It's not his to begin with, but it becomes his. Okay. So now we have, when Peleg was 30 years old, he became the father of Reu. After the birth of Reu, Peleg lived another 209 years and had other sons and daughters. So now you see a drastic difference. This is like over 200 years different. So after Eber gave birth, his father, Eber lived another 430 years. But after Peleg gave, not he gave birth, but after he has children, he lives another 209 years. So that's a drastic difference. Notice that this is also a drastic difference after Babel happens. So as soon as Babel is happening, remember, Babel happens during Peleg's legacy. It told us that in 10. I re-emphasized it here. That's when the drop-off starts with the years. At first, it was less, like Noah and his sons. Noah lived longer than like his sons lived. And then it gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And so now we have this big steep drop off. Another 200 years was shaved off from Eber to Peleg's generation. So now it says when Ru was 32 years old, see how they're all having children in their 30s? He became the father of Sarug. After the birth of Sarug, Ru lived another 207 years and had other sons and daughters. Keep in mind, it's telling us that each of these people is not just one child each. Each of these people is having other children, but we don't get to know those other children and their lineages because we're following the lineage of Jesus. If you don't know that about the Bible, it's going to tell you the lineage from Adam all the way to Jesus, all the way through. It's going to tell you every descendant, and some of it mentions even the females who fall within his lineage. Is going to give you the full lineage, so that's why it's following Shem's descendants in this point, but not all of them, just one lineage. So now when Ru was 32 years old, he became the father of Sarug. We got that one. When Sarug was 30 years old, he became the father of Nahor. After the birth of Nahor, Sarug lived another 200 years and had other sons and daughters. All right. So that's Nahor. Now let's keep going because we're almost there. Nahor is at the top here. When Nahor was 29 years old, he became the father of Terah. After the birth of Terah, Nahor lived another 119 years. We have another drastic change. At first, it was another 200 years or so. Now, that was a group of 3 generations. Now we're in the generations where they live another 100 or so years. That's very interesting. And then this is even more interesting. It says after Terah was 70 years old. So everybody else having children in their 30s just about. After Terah was 70 years old, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now, here's what I found interesting. This reads the same way as when Noah was mentioned as having children. It says, after Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then the way it reads in the text here, it says, after Terah was 70 years old, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now, I don't know in either situation if they were all triplets. I have no idea. We just know that there were 3 sons in each case. But the biggest thing that, other than the triplet thing that happens, is that, there's such a big age gap. Even for Noah, when he had children at 500. I say that again. Noah had children at 500 years old, whereas all of his ancestors had children around 100 and something years old, maybe 200 years old. There is something significant happening. And I believe in that generation, at the time, something significant that was happening was the wickedness that was going on, that it tells us a little bit about in Noah's time. I believe that was happening during that period as to why Noah didn't have children, maybe didn't get married. I don't know the situation of what chaos was happening, but didn't have children. And I think the same thing was happening with Terah. This is why I say the same thing was happening with Terah, because in our next verse, it's going to tell us that with Terah, he decided to go leave. So this is what it says happened to Terah's family. This is the account of Terah's family. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. I know y'all know it is Abraham. His name is not Abraham yet. It's Abram. But, and Haran was the father of Lot. So it gives us Haran had Lot. Now, it says, but Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans. That's why his name has a little X over it. The land of his birth, while his father Terah was still living. Meanwhile, Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. Milcah and her sister Iscah were daughters of Nahor's brother Haran. But Sarai was unable to become pregnant and had no children. So, yes, in this example, it's giving you the direct lineage. Haran not only had Lot, that was his son. So that's where his lineage comes in. But he has daughters. Now, they probably had different mothers, but he has daughters. The daughters were Milcah and Iscah. Milcah marries Nahor, her uncle. This is right here in the Bible. Um, Not in a way that other people would say, like, oh, that's your. It's not in our present day mind how we would think of the same. Okay, it was common practice for people to marry women within their lineage or purview, because you don't want to marry somebody who you don't, not familiar with, kind of thing. Um, so it gives us who their wives are. Now, this map is to help show you how this is laid out. Remember, it talks about them going east. So this is still Tigris and Euphrates rivers here. You could always find them, Euphrates and Tigris, and it comes from Turkey, and they travel east. Remember, they would have left from here and traveled east. Okay, so it's telling us that their birthplace was of the Chaldeans. So this is after the scattering. Remember, this is like, I gotta go back and count, but this is like at least 5 generations after Babel, the Tower of Babel has happened. So they have scattered and live in Ur. Ur is very, very south, very close to the Persian Gulf. So this is the land of their birth. So it tells us that Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans. This is where Haran died. So what happens is, let's go to the next one. One day, Terah took his son Abram, his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and his grandson Lot, his son Haran's child, and moved away from Ur of the Chaldeans. This is why I said something probably was going on, because what reason would it be for Terah to not have children until he was 70? There's something happening. We just don't know the details. So why didn't Nahor go? Nahor already had a family. It tells us that Sarai could not have children. Haran had already died. So Abram went along with his wife Sarai. Nahor stayed, and he will come back up. He is shaded out on the PowerPoint, but he will come back up later on in Genesis because he's an important character. His lineage is important to Abram. So Terah took 1, 2, 3 people, moved away from Ur of the Chaldeans, and it tells us he was headed for the land of Canaan, but they stopped at Haran and settled there. He was headed for the land of Canaan. Canaan's all the way over here. This is Canaan. All of this is Canaan territory. It's here in this map if you want to see it a little bit better. This is Canaan territory. So he was headed from here all the way over here, Mediterranean Sea, but stopped in Haran and settled there. So on his way, go up the Euphrates, you will see Haran. Close to Canaan, not quite Canaan. Settles in Haran. Okay. That is the end of chapter 11. So we leave off, and it tells us that Terah lived for 205 years and died while still in Haran. Even though he was headed for Canaan, never made it there, he lived for 205 years total. You see that how that drop off continues. He lived for 205 years total, which means that all that's left in Haran is Abram, Sarai, and Lot. Because Terah is gone. Haran has died. Nahor is back in Ur. And that is the family that we pick up with next week. So I want to be able to take questions from people as you are trying to understand and put this together. I'm hoping that the Bible study guide that I put together will help you as well. Are there any questions as we have tried to put together this piece of the puzzle? I hope that you all can geographically understand where they were located, the whole Mesopotamia, Babylonia region. I hope that you can see where they traveled from, how they got scattered, why they got scattered, most importantly. And now it's time to reflect on, well, how can we prevent from being scattered? How can we prevent from having to be punished? It's like God has to continue punishing us to protect us from ourselves, and so even in our day-to-day lives now, we can think about how God has to continue punishing us until we can help ourselves. So we have to depend on him and not on our own merit, on our own ability, on our own desires to get us anywhere. So that is chapter 11. So I hope it was helpful. If it wasn't helpful, please let me know. If it's like, oh, Jessica, I want you to do this differently or better, this will help me better, let me know, because I'm not trying to just do this for my own health. Although I love teaching and sharing and getting into the nitty-gritty about history, I still want to do it effectively. So let me know. Otherwise, I will see y'all next week. The Bible study guide is coming out tomorrow. Be sure to subscribe in order to make sure you can get access to that via email. And I will see y'all in the next one. Happy New Year.